have one. It's clipped on because you clipped it on. Thank you. So maybe you guys are a little groggy after lunch too, but I'm just getting ready here. Thanks all so much for coming and hearing about data governance. Honestly, when I started this, I was a little worried that data governance is really dull. And as I got into it, I'm more and more interested in it, and I hope that comes across in the slides. This is good stuff. I'm Damon Feldman. I've been working on the consulting, pretty loud there, on the consulting and delivery side of MarkLogic for 8 years. So I've worked with a lot of our largest customers, worked with intelligence customers, defense customers, the healthcare.gov effort was a big part of that, insurance payers. So the nice thing about being around for a while is I see the data go into the MarkLogic systems and be consolidated, and then what happens to it over time after that, right? Great, I've got my data in one place, what now? And you have to govern it. You have to understand its quality and get to a point you can trust it. So I'm going to talk about that, right? So what's data governance? I won't read that. That's a quote from a data governance group as to their definition of what data governance is, right? And a lot of it is process, and I'm not going to talk very much about process. Having a data steward, having rules for how data is handled in training programs. I'm going to talk more about the technology that enables these processes and how MarkLogic in particular does that. In particular these things. So all of these items in this long description map to some kind of a technology process that many of us are already doing in some way, and something that a lot of times we can actually also do a little better. So, you know, we have to secure the data. Who can see the data is one key aspect of data governance. We have to track the data because we don't know that it's the right data and that it's in integrity if we don't know where it came from. We have to get to a point that we know that the quality is good enough, that we know where it came from, so that when we use it, people, our customers, our users within our organizations or outside can trust the data, that it's worthwhile. There's quality monitoring and rules. I'll speak a little bit just about when data moves, check that it all got where it belongs. Right? Reconcile the data to know that you don't have cumulative errors creeping in from drop data. Obviously, we have to store it. MarkLogic's good at that, audit it. All of this comes together to enable compliance. Compliance to some kind of a policy, whether it's an external policy from a regulator where we have to do something or we get a huge fine, right? In finance, it could be billions of dollars. Or our internal policies, how we internally decide to protect our customers' data and take care of our customers. And the title of this talk is Practical Data Governance. So on the one side here, we see a group of people with a bunch of Post-it notes, just doing the things that we're all doing, trying to trace some data from somewhere to somewhere, trying to ensure that certain things get audited so that we know what happened to the data. And then we want to move, but not necessarily in one huge jump, towards more of a console or a view technology enablement. And maybe it's baby steps, maybe it's something big. And the reason that we want to get there is we, number one, don't want certain bad things to happen. Data breaches have, really only in the past few years, we've really gotten used to it. Data breaches have gotten to the point where if the data is stolen or something, somebody important is going to lose their job, you know? And I have some slides on that later. I don't know about you, I've had maybe 3 data breach letters. One from Office of Personnel Management. All the information I submitted to the government is now on a server in China. They've got all my information. The Target credit card one, and then one of the healthcare issues. They got some, I think, non-health data of mine. And it's almost like that's the way it is, but it's pretty terrible. And then there's this thing I put here, low quality data of questionable provenance. It's like the Princess Bride, right? Rodents of unusual size. Just a successful system, it's done, you get the data and it's maybe not quite what you hoped for. It's kind of junk. We want to avoid that. And of course fines and other kinds of censure from actually violating a law or an internal policy. And that's the negative, but on the good side, we want to be able to do these data hubs, pull the data together, and still have it be secure, not have it be worse, right? Have it be better. Track and trust data. I think trust is really key to data governance. Data governance sounds a little dull. Being able to trust that your information is of high quality and came from the right place and we know what it is just the business that we're all in. And I'm going to talk about technology that enables us to simplify data governance, right? To make the data governance process itself governable. Let me hit a little button here to track time. Okay, so that's 5 minutes off. And so those are the kind of things we want to achieve with data governance. And now here's data governance, these colored blocks put around a data hub image, right? This is an image that we use for data hubs, bringing a lot of different data together into one place. But what we are then able to do when we do that is consolidate a lot of our processes that allow us to trust and understand our data. And you can see them listed here. There's quality rules and quality monitoring, the lineage of data, right, where it came from, its provenance, where it's going, auditing of changes in access to data, how we retain it. Right? We use tiered storage to retain different amounts in different places for different periods of time. Securing the data, of course. So I'm going to talk about how each of these works to enable data governance with MarkLogic. And the alternative is this kind of an image, and we've seen in other talks larger, worse examples. But here's just a few systems with a few ETL processes, kind of moving different things from place to place. Each system might have a different GUI, a different application sitting on top of it, you know, CRM or a dashboard or something like that, or a call center. And what we want to avoid is putting these data governance functions into multiple different applications. This is sort of the worst, where these functions exist, but they're coded into a bunch of Java code scattered all over the place. Not really good separation of concerns. When you want to go look for my auditing logic, am I auditing this kind of access all the time? How many places do I have to look and where do I have to go? I don't even know, right? And to get more applications, it gets even worse. What we want to do is by pulling the data into a hub, we want to also use that new architecture, that benefit, to consolidate these functions and make them easier, and again, make data governance more governable. Another way to do it, not that different. Instead of in the applications, this is a little better. At least move the data down, move the data, what I'm going to call in this talk the data logic, things about data, move the data logic down to the various databases rather than storing it and encoding it up in the Java apps, right? So that's a step in the right direction, but it's still scattered all over the place, hard to find. Some things you have to have on every system, like security. Whoops. But other things, let me back up. Other things you can consolidate in the data hub. I actually threw more dots on there. Worst possible case, you have half of your governance being tracked in some database, in some databases and at the data layer. The other half is hopefully tracked in some applications, and you've got all kinds of overlap and gaps, and you don't know which of your data governance processes are really happening. Now, this is about if you have done the silo busting and you're bringing data together into a hub, which some people have, and that's been great. But there's also something that is similar but very, very different, which you could call a data governance hub. This is a data hub that does not consolidate all your data from all your silos. It's a data hub that consolidates all the data in service of data governance. All of the audits of who accessed what, all of the data movement records to say what data moved from where to where and what's the lineage of a piece of data as it moves from the system of record source system down through various other downstream systems. The retention and archiving information could be, well, that's less so in this kind of a hub. Certainly data quality, you can check certain things in the hub, and when there's a quality violation, whether it's just a schema being validated or some kind of a business rule about data being validated, you can store the record of that happening in one place. So this is a technique to start to add data governance to the entire enterprise, even though the enterprise still does kind of look like a large collection of systems, as Joe was describing this morning, where as we grow and get successful, we build many systems, we can at least consolidate our governance information. Okay, so that's a little bit about the value and the purpose of governance, how hubs can help with governance, but let's talk about all these individual functions, right? Deduplication, data mastering, lineage, auditing, quality. So the first and one of the biggest is data lineage. And here's a quote that as you get a little older, you hear from time to time. I'm going to send you in for, your doctor would say, this would be healthcare, I'm going to send you in for this repetitive test. I'm going to send you in for another MRI. You say, but no, the other guy already sent me for an MRI. It's kind of expensive, even with the insurance. The deductible itself was just cost me a lot of money. I don't want to go for another one. He may be looking, or she, at a what did I call it? Questionable data of unknown provenance. A very simple record, like, yeah, there was an MRI they had performed, it was fine, but that's not enough for a doctor to say, oh yeah, you've got these repeated headaches. Yeah, you're fine. Go take some aspirin. Go home. Don't worry about it, right? But if we have more data, because maybe we have a data hub, but we're also tracking all this red lineage data, where the MRI was ordered by Saul Jochenfloster, who's a doctor. It's not just a lab tech or something. Reviewed by that same doctor. It came into the laboratory information management system in August 2014. Here's its identifier. That's a lot more information, right? I know what kind of record it was. I know who to call if I need to know more. I know the ID number if I have to dig into a source system and look it up some more. And I can have a different level of confidence and maybe not send you for a repeated test. So in MarkLogic, we can take this data and put it in, but the thing that we do perhaps better than most other technologies is we can also store other data is not really the right term. We can store data that's not part of the core data model in the core system. We can store something like the manifest that described the 50,000 test records that were imported on a certain Tuesday, right? We can take that as metadata, store it as is with no data modeling, and have the lineage tracked in the database with the data, right? We can also take things like a REST payload or a SOAP XML payload that caused a record to appear in the database. We can store that as well. We can store that in JSON or XML or whatever. So we're sort of ready to take all this other data that describes the movement around the system, because we don't even think of this as data. Right? If I run a batch process to take a system of record overnight, load 50,000 documents into my hub system, and I have a manifest that says which 50,000 moved and what batch number they were part of and how long it took and all that, I will often throw that data away if I'm thinking in a traditional format, because I don't want to stand up a development effort to save that. But with MarkLogic, you can just save it, and then you've got lineage. Another way to do lineage, instead of tracking like a batch manifest or something, you can track the data in a more granular way inside of the documents themselves. So primarily, I don't know if that's true anymore, largely MarkLogic stores documents, XML documents and JSON documents. So this is an XML document describing a loan for a mortgage, potentially. And you can see that it's got a couple names in here, right? It's got Robert Jones and Bob Jonas. So it's got a data quality problem. We don't really know this person's name. What we can do is we can put the source in here to help clarify what's the more reliable place that this data may have come from. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the X in XML. XML is extensible markup language. So this is extensible. Right here we have this source, which is an attribute on the name element. And we're just saying something about the name, but we're not fundamentally changing the structure of the name. We're not breaking all of our queries and reworking our data model extensively. And what this allows us to do is see that Robert Jones came from the loan application, but the other name was probably a mispronunciation on a phone call that got typed in by a customer service rep and then got pulled into the hub. So we can understand the data better. Another way to do the same thing is with triples. This is an example where we've got this turtle syntax for triples, right? And we're annotating the same thing. We're saying this name, the Bob Jones name, has a certain data source. And by adding that as an additional piece of information, we can track the lineage of the name. This is something they do a lot in the intelligence space. They're out there gathering data from a lot of different people. It's all of different levels of reliability. They really want to know what came from where, so that when they're trying to put the whole picture together, they can tease apart the reliable and unreliable information. So if you were to do this with relational technology, not to exactly beat up on relational, but the reason that MarkLogic is particularly well suited, and it makes a lot of sense to move these kinds of data governance support technology functions into a data hub, is that to track something like your metadata about all your batch processes, in a typical project, you have to go to your data modeling team and say, hey, I've got all these batch processes. I've got 6 of them that I run every night. I need to model all of the information. I need to model their logs and their manifests and the job numbers and when they started and stopped. And that becomes like a data modeling project, right? And it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's a drag. It's a tax on your time and efficiency. It takes away from other work. So you don't want to do that. You want to be able to just store things as is and just do it more efficiently. Yeah. Even more difficult is tracking lineage per source, tracking provenance information per source and per element. We do this in some places. We saw that with XML, it's very easy to add another element and extend or put an attribute on an element. But if you think about the fact that we're really joining in information to a simple row by putting related information on possibly every column, that's a little bit of an unnatural thing for a relational database to do. You might have to break that row up into multiple parts and make each item its own table, and then every single insert and query has to deal with the fact that you have to insert to multiple places and then do a join to get it back out. So it's extremely disruptive to the data model to try to store lineage on a per element basis in a relational model. And then anything else about sources and changes and schema evolution and everything else, whenever you want to do that with something other than MarkLogic, you don't have this store as is. Okay, so that's a lot about storing as is. And I actually read a tweet or a quote about big data standing data on its head. We're now working at the enterprise level, working in a world where data exists in all these different places. Our job is not to take data that's never been modeled and model it. Our job is to take all these different models and combine and harmonize them. So your data has already been modeled. Even your batch manifest is a certain sense a simple data model. So don't remodel it. Just store it in the database. And I think outside of data governance, just MarkLogic generally, that's a key insight, to start thinking about, hey, what do I have and can I just store it? Ways to use data lineage. The holy grail, I think, would be to show it to the end user and really enable new functionality in your system. Some systems, that's exactly what you want. We saw the one where the doctor's looking at the MRI record, and he can see where it came from and where and who to talk to about it and what other system to look and get more information about it. So that's the case where we're showing it to the user as lineage. Something that I've seen more, honestly, and this goes more with the store as is, where you're not doing a heavyweight development process, is that you're using it to trace and track quality issues. You're using it to do forensics. You're using it to be aware of your audits and changes in data cleanup processes. So in this case, it's more for back-end operations. Okay. Here's some of the compliance things that are enabled. I think that MarkLogic has done at least 3 of these 4. I'm not sure about the ePrivacy directive, probably have. So Executive Order 12333, I mentioned it. If you have intelligence agencies in the United States gathering data that includes United States persons and there's no intelligence value, you have to throw it away after a set period of time. So you have to know what came in when, about whom, and how long you've had it. And if it got into a connect the dots kind of system, you have to expire that record on Damon Feldman, because he's not a person of interest, I hope. And you have to pull that dot out of the connected dots, if you will. So tracing every element back to where it came from becomes very important. ePrivacy directive is about moving data about a person across a national boundary in Europe. And then there's a use case where we're maybe doing a data hub with MarkLogic, but the systems of record are really the places where the data stewards who are charged with monitoring and overseeing data live. And they may see a quality issue or fix something in a source of a system of record. And then they have to trace that down through all the downstream systems in order to clean that record up in all the places it may have flowed to. If you don't know where it flowed to and when, you don't know where to go to straighten that out. So that's another use. And then this last one is the Deutsche Bank case, where you're pulling in data about all trades from all places to get overall risk in terms of your exposure to a financial instrument or a currency. And if you don't know where all of your trades are and which ones are about what kind of entities, you can't do that. So yeah, it's really in service of things that we have to do for compliance reasons a lot of the time. Right, so that's data lineage. That's probably the biggest complicated one. There's also auditing, right? It's prosaic, but it's absolutely necessary. It's the question of who accessed the data, who changed the data, when did they do it, were they allowed to do it, and do I have a record of that? Here's an example where the wrong data was sent to the wrong person. An HMO was exposing or referring medical information to the family members of covered people rather than the person who's actually authorized. Your family is not, by virtue of being related to you, necessarily entitled to see your medical data. So the Office of Civil Rights at CMS is the office that takes care of these kinds of HIPAA violations. And they said, yeah, you've done this 2,000 times, and now you need to monitor this for the next 6 months. And they put an auditing compliance rule upon them. Without knowing who's accessing what, and without having systems in place to do that, it's impossible to monitor the transactions for the requisite period of time and conform. One that I like a lot, so in the early days of healthcare.gov, the system wasn't performing as okay. So in the early days of healthcare.gov, we had to clean up a lot of data. One case I remember in particular was, no, I mean, in a few months it was fine, but the first few weeks were really rough. The first month or two was really rough. So I remember one case in particular. It's just a real simple thing. Somebody had, a lot of people were stuck on the wrong step in a 50-step application process. They were on step 40, but they'd actually completed the entire process, and they were ready to buy their application, right? They were at a certain place where they've sort of signed off. But then when they would come back into the system, they'd be put back on step 40. So it was a data quality issue. They could not possibly be on step 40 because they'd already signed off on their application information. They were at step 50. So it was just a data cleanup to go in there and straighten that out. If they've already signed off, advance them to step 50 so we know where they are and make it work. What we did though is we realized as we're having a bunch of these issues, and they're going to continue over a while, we're going to have to straighten a lot of things out, we don't want to lose track of what we've done to the data so that we can't look back in time and figure out how we got where we got. Yeah. So there's somebody here who knows this even better than I do, has done a lot of these cleanups. So we built a tool where this little framework, and you would say to this little function, it's not even a tool, here's the old version that I'm cleaning up, here's the new version that I'm putting in place, here's the ticket number in my ticket tracking system of why I'm doing it, right? And then you run that in a batch. And what that does is it forces everything through a process where there's this database being built up of the audit of what happened to the data and why for these data cleanup purposes. Yeah, it's very helpful. Also, it changes the last modified data on the record, so you can go to the cleanup database. Was it really last modified last week, or was it just caught in last week's data cleanup, ticket number 147? So it connects all the dots. Another kind of auditing, kind of like data lineage, you can do the information about the entire record, or you can actually use document modeling to include audits in the records by extending them and enriching them. So here's the same loan document, but as a JSON document, but same information, right? A loan with a date, an applicant. I think this just has one unique name. As this document changes over time, we can effective date it very easily because we're using a document model. So this makes auditing much easier. This is a kind of auditing, in my view, where what we do is we have a new loan down here at the bottom with status current. We've added a new element, status current, a new field to the JSON. And the old record, we just inserted a couple new fields. We said, this is now status historic. This is not the current record. Okay, it's here for audit purposes, really, at this point. Here's when it was modified and became an audit record. And here's who did it, Sally Jones. Here's their username. So this allows us to sort of very easily, without even using bitemporal, very easily, in some sense, go back in time and see what happened over time to records for those records where we care about the history of changes. Very easy to do. If we were to do this with relational, not so easy. If you have a loan document with a certain date and then you have another one with another date, how do you do that? Do you put a date on every single table, right? A start and an end date, an effective date, every single table, and then read everything you want to read with stored procedures? That's very difficult. Another thing you can do is you can put one date on there. You can put one date on the main loan document. But then if you want to know what was the person's address in June of 2012, How do you trace all of your stuff back there to see what was the effective loan and trace all the IDs and find their address at that time? That becomes very complicated. So it's just by breaking it up into relational tables, it's a lot harder. By having these business entities stored as business entities in the document model, much easier. And you could also augment it with semantic triples as an alternate way of representing it. So some key points. There's the data cleanup story. If you, we could change anything. We could replace an entire document. We could just change the status, which would be one little string. And whatever we changed, we could always store the old and the new in MarkLogic, because MarkLogic takes data as is with no modification. We didn't have to remodel it. We didn't have to modify all of our structures to be a mix of half-baked audits together with complete records. We could just put it in this little cleanup database, and it was really easy. So writing as is really the big benefit here. Something I should mention is that MarkLogic also has an auditing capability where it just puts things into audit logs. Every time somebody of a certain permission level accesses a certain document, that could be logged. Every time somebody changes a document, logged. Deletes, changing security permissions themselves. So somebody goes in and gives themselves an elevated permission, that could be logged. So there's a capability to just log things for an accurate record of what happens to the database. Okay, so that's lineage and auditing. What about the checking and enforcement of data quality? Right, obviously, much easier when all your data, well, maybe not obviously, when your data is in one place and to the extent you want, your data is in a harmonious format and kind of put together and semantically compatible, checking data rules becomes a lot easier. Instead of checking it, remember all the dots scattered on all the different systems, half of them in the Java layer and the applications up above or .NET or whatever, half of them down in some data store procedure. If you consolidate your data and you consolidate the format of your data, then the rules become simpler to administer, simpler to track, and you can apply most of them in one place. So we had a rule, again with healthcare.gov, where we were getting Medicaid transfers of people who didn't qualify for Medicaid, so hey, go get your insurance on the exchange. And the ages didn't look right. The parent and child had been reversed. Probably the spec for how to communicate, it wasn't as clear as it could have been, so people were sending people flipped. So we added a rule which said the age of the parent must be higher than the age of the child. And that rule then could be used in a couple of ways. It could either reject the record, or it can just cause basically an audit, which we want to store for quality tracking purposes, to say, hey, the quality of this record's not so good. You want to look at this and maybe aggregate it by state and see where these problems are coming from. So that's a quality rule, and this could be as simple as a schema. I would say that having a record conform to a schema, whether it's XML schema or JSON schema, that's essentially applying rules to it. So a security number has to look like this. For a non-US address, the country code has to be non-empty, things like that. So and then there's schematron on top of that. Another thing is quality binding more active, where you have a process, maybe the data steward or the data custodian does this, to go in and query the data and check 10 records every month to see, are these good, or 100, what's my error rate over time. All that's much easier if your data is in one place in a hub. So as I said, uniform data allows uniform rules, right? You can have 4 different systems that represent an age in different ways, or a date of birth in one and a birth date in the other, just simple name changes or more complicated things. And you can consolidate these rules into similar technologies applied to similar data structures. It just makes it a lot easier, much more manageable. Also, with the other things like data lineage, you can trace your issues to the source, right? So if you have a problem in the data hub, you can say, well, where did this data come from? Wow, it's all coming from this one system, which is really the source of the problem. Where did it go to? I have to go and clean it up there as well. So it all kind of works together holistically. This is just a little anecdote. When I was doing a little research for this, I talked to one of our Intel customers, or one of our consulting groups on the Intel side, and they do this thing I thought was fascinating. It really surprised me. If they're going to import a MySQL database full of, I really don't know what they're tracking, but I don't know, bad people or something, I don't know, suspected, I don't know. They actually take the binary backup of the MySQL database and they store it in MarkLogic as a large binary. Right? MarkLogic takes any data in any format and stores it as is. This is the extreme case. They put the entire MySQL database in there, and they call that level 0 tracking, because it's just the data as it came bit by bit off the disk. And then they go to that, they plow through the entire database, and they take every row and they turn it into a little JSON document, and they store it in MarkLogic. So that's a lossless transform. They call that level 1. They haven't reformatted it, they haven't harmonized it, they haven't gotten anything into a common canonical model or anything like that. They've just done a lossless transform. They call that level 1. And then they take that data and they transform it into the form that they really want to serve whatever applications to connect dots and find the bad guys. So, I don't know, it's just an example of extreme lineage and how storing any data in any format allows that to happen, storing data as is. Okay, so lineage, auditing, traceability, so security. Obviously, a big part of governing data is deciding who gets to see what and then enforcing that. And she should apologize, because that's my data. This is the head of OPM resigning. This is the head of Target who replaced the CEO who quit, apologizing about the data breach. This is an interesting one. This is Silk Road losing all their money. So I find this interesting because we're at the MarkLogic conference, and they actually lost their money because they weren't transactional. As I understand it, you could say, hey, I want to withdraw $1,000 in Bitcoin, right? And before that sort of settled in their transactional system, you could change the transaction ID really quick. And then after it settled, you could say, hey, I never got my money. And it would look and say, yeah, your transaction ID is not here because it got changed in this non-transactional way. And it would resend you your $1,000 again. So you could drain the system of the Bitcoin, and they stole all the money. Yeah, transactionality is a security breach. It's interesting. This is the Qatar National Bank getting hacked and losing the Al Jazeera employees and the ruling family's passwords. Let's just say it's not a democratic state. You don't want to do that. This is just not the right person's password to lose. So, yeah, so security breaches are becoming a big deal, right? People are resigning. The heads of agencies and large Fortune 100 companies are resigning because of data breaches. It's not small potatoes anymore. And fortunately, MarkLogic is very good at security. Here's the old world just showing security, where worst case, you've got your security embedded in your Java code. And when somebody does this, I just don't know what they're thinking. I think somebody said, I can't remember who, if your data security isn't enforced at your data layer, then you didn't secure your data, right? Well, you sort of did. You would need to get onto these servers and get one of these database passwords in order to access it. But then you've got, a lot of developers and admins probably have that capability. Then you've got full access to all the data. And what's more, if you want secure access to the data, you have to run it all through this thing, this ESB, this .NET application, this Java service, whatever it is. If you want to go just stand up a business intelligence tool and access your data, or put some new MapReduce job in your data lake, that's insecure access. It's a huge hole. And as you consolidate your data into a data hub or a data lake even, I'm not crazy about data lakes, hub is a more robust thing, but as you consolidate it, it gets worse instead of better. You've solved your data silo problem so you can access your data, but you've enabled an attacker or a data, bad actor to also access their data. So MarkLogic has best-in-class security. We heard this morning about the MarkLogic 9 features that are coming to even refine this. I won't talk about those here. So I'll stick to MarkLogic 8 and 7 and 6 that all have various security capabilities. Common criteria certification. As a product, there's only 2 databases with their current version, and we're the only NoSQL database to have this certification. We have ATO, authority to operate on various intelligence and defense systems. There's a very stringent process, the right kind of encryption. Like most mature products, we have role-based access control. So a user has a set of roles, and those roles determine which documents on a document-by-document basis they're allowed to access. We also have something called compartment security, where you can make an and/or combination of different roles and have instead of just having a single role grant access, you need certain combinations of roles to grant access. This isn't That's specific to MarkLogic, honestly. This is just something in data governance I thought I should mention, that one process to make data trustable and trackable is to guarantee that when you move data from place to place, it actually all did move. And there's a few ways to do that. You can say, at the first you have to choose a frequency. Could be on a daily basis, could be weekly, could be every month or so. You just check to make sure all the data is as you expect it and there's no cumulative effort creeping in. One way is to just check counts. A million here, all right, they're good. Another way is to get more in depth and look at the specific IDs and update dates in both systems to make sure they're the same. And you can even go to the next level and hash the data. If you can reconstruct a full record, make sure they're exactly the same. As I said, with tracking things, the manifests and the lists that allow you to reconcile can be stored. You can say, here's when I reconciled it, here's what was reconciled, and here's the lists of items that I know are there. So those are I didn't talk about retention, but I'll talk about it a little bit next. Those are some of the capabilities, the technology capabilities that MarkLogic has that allows you to do better data governance. But now I'll talk a little bit, the same question from a different angle. What are some of the MarkLogic features that are particularly useful for data governance and make us a better data governance enabler? Yeah, we've talked about some of these in security, and I think I've said many times until you're tired of hearing it, store your data as is. Don't remodel your data. You have data. It's in a data model of some form. Store it. Use it. Okay, so temporal documents is one. To be able to reconstruct the state of the world as of a certain point in time, and I was talking about this earlier at the expert session. I forgot to mention that one of the nice things about MarkLogic is all the features work together, right? So if you temporally track all of your documents, you're also temporally tracking all of your triples, and then you run some complicated triple that does documents and SQL and Sparkle and puts it all together. That combined unit is also temporal, right? So the system really does sort of work as though it was at a point in time, and you can reconstruct what happened when and audit things and track things. So that's one capability, is temporal documents. Just the fact that we have a comprehensive set of types, right? We talked about this intelligence customer taking the actual binary dump of a source database and putting it right in MarkLogic to have absolute traceability, no question of how the data got to be how it is. It's kind of remarkable, and they had a need to do that. You may or may not, but JSON and XML data are flying around in message formats all the time. The healthcare.gov data services hub tracks every single message that gets sent in or out, and then also internally to have the full traceability of the four so-called legs of operation. Came into the hub, got sent somewhere, came back, and was returned. So they can actually trace what happened where and bring that all up on dashboards, because those messages were modeled as messages. And again, there's this theme. It's already been modeled. Just store it in the database. And then they wrap it with some metadata to make it a little more analyzable. But the traceability is so much easier because we can store anything as is. We have semantics, so you can add these rules and relationships. And then by getting it all in one place, because you don't have four different systems bolted together, your data rules and your data processes become in one place, to a certain extent. As I said, the source system of record has to be secured, right? The updates might happen upstream, so you have to audit that. But to a large extent, you can consolidate. Semantics, I just mentioned this sort of almost in passing, that there are some compliance ontologies out in the world. So ontologies and semantics are a way to describe some of these things. MarkLogic supports ontologies and semantics, so you can look at how to do that. It's sort of beyond the scope of this talk, how to use semantics for compliance. So in summary, I just got the 10-minute warning back there. In summary, we're all doing governance, right? And we're all trying to stay on top of it, whether it's all those little post-its in the first slide, or if we have a data hub with a console, or all of our messages being tracked somewhere in dashboards showing what happened. We're all digging through all kinds of audits and traceability data, trying to reconstruct and do forensics and figure out what happened and comply with audits, right? One of the other speakers was talking about a big insurance company spending $5 million responding to one audit, very expensive. But we can do it better if we can consolidate our data in one place and put these functions around our consolidated data, or build a governance hub that just gathers all these different kinds of governance data, which is actually very wide, right? It could be the binary that went in, it could be traceability data, it could be data about what kind of quality issues occurred from some quality metric. But both of these are really ways of consolidating data to enable governance. Okay, and with that, I'll switch over and take any questions that people have. Yes, sir.
So, through this software MarkLogic, because you are pulling the data from the source and you have a good record and a solid record of the system of the truth. However, for the data quality, when it comes to the data governance, like when it comes to the change management, data sometimes go through various processes for the business need. How does MarkLogic and its capability help the change management process for data governance?
So how does MarkLogic help the change management process as data goes through many different steps in its sort of life cycle and pathway through the enterprise?
Exactly. And does that really change the game for the data, for the change management and the data governance and the various roles you have around, like data steward, business data steward, technical data steward, all kinds of roles that are around the governance? Does that really change?
Is it a game changer, and does it enable the various roles like a data steward, a data custodian? I think it is. I mean, it's not completely free. So when data moves from place to place, there's hopefully already some record, like a SOAP message. If not, that system has to throw off an audit. But all that can go into the consolidated data hub, right? Also, to the extent, so that would be a case of having these processes of data moving, throw off additional information that goes into a hub that supports data governance, and that's a data governance hub. The other thing to do is to move towards silo busting so there's not so much movement, right? And then the process is all there in the hub and even easier to track. So both of those are good to track and pretty easy to track. Is it a game changer or not? You have to implement it and tell me, but I think so. I hope so. Yeah. Other questions?
Hi, great talk. In your experience, do the use cases mean that they're kind of doing rapid dashboard development when you're out there and some need comes up for new compliance? Are they throwing together a new app rapidly? I mean,
yeah.
How is it happening?
I've seen a couple things. So I want to make a distinction, because you point something very important. It's much more important to store the data than to have a dashboard or an app to show the data, because you can build the app later if you really need it, but if you didn't store the data, you're done, right? There's no way to get it back. So storing it is the main thing. And then if you need it regularly, I've seen data browsers sort of built on top of this, so you can give the back end, usually the back office people, the ability to dig through all the audits and traceability and see what's what. Just a quick little HTML app. But if not, it could be somebody actually going to our query console or something and digging through the data and saying, hey, here's a record that somebody said my record's corrupt. Let me look at it. Wow, it is corrupt. They're right. Okay, where'd it come from? Let me do a query to find that lineage record. Oh, it came from this other system. Then maybe you have to make a phone call, go to that other system and look at it. But it could be a manual process, or it could be that a dashboard evolves, or an interactive app. Thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
Are there any built-in tools to take the data from level 0 to level 1 to level 2, as you explained, or do we have to build an app on the outside to do that?
Right. So that system that did level 0, 1, 2, I think that they had an app or a data loader on the outside. I think they had, I don't know exactly what their process was. I don't want to say too much about MarkLogic 9 because I don't have the disclaimer in this talk, but there's been some talk about the data movement SDK, which should have something about how to move data around, but I won't get into the details because I don't really know. I'm not the right person to answer. But it's not automated in MarkLogic 8 that I can think of, other than the fact that you can just fire up MLCP and take the binary and put it in. You can fire up, a transform and send each row in as a CSV and have it transformed into JSON. So it's pretty easy, as these things go, but it is.
I mean, it's 2 ETLs minimum, right? To take it into JSON and then from JSON to map it to the canonical. Those are 2 different ETL jobs.
You know, ETL is almost a swear word around here, right? So,
yeah, I know, that's why I'm asking.
So the binary goes in as is. It's just one call. There's no transformation at all. It goes in exactly as is. The first transform, if you want to call it that, is purely mechanical, from a row to the natural representation of that row. And all the relational systems already have these capabilities too, to like export the data as JSON, export the data as XML. So it's technically, I guess it's a transform, but it's like a no-op transform. And then if you do want, these people did have a very sophisticated provenance-based ontology that they wanted to put it into, a certain model. So then they did a transform to convert it into that model. One substantive transform. Yeah, it's a good question.
But that sounds very much like the content processing framework. So you check in one binary data, and then in MarkLogic you're doing some content processing, and so it's not ETL, it's done in MarkLogic, right? It sounds very much like that.
Very much. I think for MySQL in particular, I don't think we have a CPF flow, but for other things like Word docs and PDFs and 300 other things, you can do a quick transform.
MySQL is open source, and you have the DOM, so get the data out of the DOM, the source, and you could integrate that in CPF, right?
You could certainly do it in CPF, yeah.
Sounds very much like that.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So yeah, maybe just a quick follow-up question. So yeah, MarkLogic really doesn't need a framework to run it, right? I mean, currently where I'm at today, we have a framework that does the data quality check. There are some standard data quality check that we have built, and really based on some business need or business requirements with the custom. Does MarkLogic really provide that capability, or that still needs to be done from a framework?
To do the data checks?
Yes.
We certainly have tools to help. You can do it. It depends on how the data comes in, right? You can do it with a trigger. You can do it as part of your REST extension. You can do it as a batch process. As it comes in, you can just run a Corb job or some other batch process to do all the checks. So I guess you could call this a framework. It's not like there's a data quality button or a rules console. You have to build your own process, decide if you want to do schema or schematron. A schema is the only one where it is sort of built in. There's a CPF plugin to do schema validation automatically.
So the standard practice should be you build a good solid framework to run the MarkLogic.
Yeah.
To do that data quality or whatever that you want to do.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. You should build something repeatable and scalable. Yeah. Okay, last question.
Yeah,
Back, sir.
you mentioned storing the source data from various data sources. So if you actually stored the actual text, then your index size and consequently your forest size is going to be too big to manage. So is there a way in MarkLogic to say, okay, this source data, I don't need it in the forest, but somewhere else, and index only the canonical model?
So if you're storing your source data, you're worried the indexes may get too large? Yeah, so there's a couple ways around that. One, I don't know if I want to recommend this, but you could store it as a binary even though it's text, and then it won't get indexed. So that's one item. But the other thing is, remember there's tiered storage and whatnot, so you can just sort of move that into less and less expensive storage areas. And a lot of these audits and traceability, you only need them occasionally when you have an issue. It's not like they're part of your online transaction load, so they're sort of sitting there on disk, not hurting anything, if you will. So the data size can just spill over to a lower cost storage, or I wouldn't worry about it until you have a problem. You might be surprised at how efficient the compression is and how it works. But yeah, there's a price for everything. If you index more, it does take up more disk space. Yeah. Okay, time's up. Thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate it.